And that is it for The Angle tonight. See you here tomorrow night. Take it away, Shannon.
Thank you so much, Laura. Here is what we have coming up tonight.
President Trump returns to the White House, facing down Democrats over DACA, the program that protects illegals brought here as children, and facing a potential government shutdown. Do his controversial remarks take away any of his negotiating power?
Well, I, for one, will not vote for government funding until we get a deal on DACA.
Ed Henry and Chris Steyerwalt lay out what's ahead. Plus,
let's not turn women into snowflakes.
Former Secretary of State and National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice broke through barriers over and over in her rise to political stardom. Now she's saying Me Too should be careful not to cross the line. We'll tell you who's on her side and why. And will Democrats embrace Chelsea Manning's surprise primary challenge for Democratic Senator Ben Cardin's seat?
We don't need them anymore. We can do better.
It's true. The former Army soldier whose conviction for leaking national secrets and violating the Espionage Act was commuted by President Obama is running for Senate.
Hello and welcome to Fox News at Night. I'm Shannon Bream in Washington. New tonight, the president is back in town and gearing up for multiple showdowns as lawmakers tonight get back to business and focus on what are sure to be tense talks ahead. There is a good chance this all goes down to the wire when government funding is set to run out Friday night at midnight. As a growing chorus of Democrats suggest, a shutdown is worth the price if millions of people here in the U.S. illegally do not get some sort of legal status in the bargain.
I, for one, will not vote for government funding until we get a deal on DACA.
But that does for now appear to be the minority view. The New York Times reporting a short time ago that Democrats facing re-election in states that Mr. Trump carried in 2016 fear that a government funding crisis precipitated by an immigration showdown could imperil their campaigns. Meanwhile, Republican Senator Lindsey Graham quoted as saying, "To believe that you can successfully blame Democrats for a shutdown over the DACA debate is naive." Chief National Correspondent Ed Henry with more now on how lawmakers are weighing the risks of the battle ahead. Good evening, Ed.
Good to see you, Shannon. Think back to the Obama years. Whenever Republicans talked about shutting down the government, there'd be outrage among Democrats, some in the media, charging that GOP leaders were acting like terrorists and were going to bring the economy crashing down. Yet now the shoe's on the other foot, and you have some Democrats, as you noted, openly talking about trying to score political points and get leverage against President Trump by shutting the government down to get their way on DACA. And few, other than Democratic Senator Joe Manchin, are even calling them out about it. Listen.
If my fellow colleagues and Democrats in the caucus want to do something about that's wrong. That doesn't fix anything. We have a shutdown looming. We have to make sure this government runs and operates in a functional way. It takes all of us working as Americans.
This comes as at least 4 Democrats, led by Maxine Waters, have announced they'll boycott the president's State of the Union address later this month. New tonight, Congresswoman Frederica Wilson, remember the colorful cowboy hats since she feuded with the president last year, says she'll skip the speech because of what she called, quote, racist and incendiary remarks that the president made about Haiti and various African nations. She added, quote, that she's going to boycott. And the president tweeted, never mind, the president, he said that he did not say this. Senator Dickey Durbin, he tweeted, totally misrepresented what was said at the DACA meeting. Deals can't get made when there's no trust. Durbin blew DACA and is hurting our military. Now, Waters and other Democrats had their say. Listen.
I didn't go to the inauguration. I didn't go to, the joint session that was held after that. I don't intend to go to this one. Why would I take my time to go and sit and listen to a liar?
It's past time that we stop dignifying the performance of this reality TV show performer. Let's get serious about governance.
That was Earl Blumenauer. Note that ironic mention of getting serious about governing. The bickering on both sides over DACA is making it less likely there'll be a budget agreement to keep the government open, meaning the government is about to shut down Friday at midnight. Why is that significant? Right on the 1-year anniversary of the president's inauguration. Shannon?
And we will be here watching if it comes to that. Ed Henry, thank you very much. President Trump blaming Democrats for, quote, blowing DACA negotiations, saying Sunday the Obama-era immigration program is probably dead. With 4 days now left to reach a deal over government funding, DACA is still very much in the mix here. Now, the last time we were talking about a government shutdown in December, a Wall Street Journal NBC poll found 31% say they would blame Republicans. 29% would point the finger at Democrats, and 18% would blame President Trump himself if the government shut down. So what can we expect as that Friday deadline approaches? Fox News politics editor Chris Steyerwalt is here to iron it all out for us. Good to see you tonight.
I was hoping it was going to be somebody else. I didn't know I had to answer all that. I feel a lot of pressure now.
You do.
Shannon.
There are many questions, but let me give you a little setup here to tee you up. Now, we have a couple of senators tweeting about this. We have Senator Tom Cotton saying this, Republican. So Democrats are now threatening to shut down the government if they don't get amnesty for millions of illegal immigrants. Let's see how that works out for them, especially in places like West Virginia, Indiana, Missouri, North Dakota, and Montana. Now, on the other side of the aisle, Senator Brian Schatz of Hawaii says, nobody wins a government shutdown battle, but I do know one thing. If it happens, it will be because a bipartisan compromise was rejected by Republicans. Anyone who says they want to avoid a shutdown should be asking for a vote on that compromise. And my understanding is this is the compromise that was brought to the president that he was so insulted by that the White House just said it wasn't even serious.
First of all, Brian Schatz should be careful with the 280 tweet character limit. He should dial that back. 140 should be enough, America. 140 should be enough.
Say what you got to say.
Look, a government shutdown is like a war. Nobody really wins it, but somebody loses less than the other guy. I think, and this is just my hunch here, I think we're going to have one. I think we're going to have a little one. I think this is a hot stove moment.
A mini shutdown?
Probably, you know, the norm, every president except for, I believe, I don't think George W. Bush ever had a shutdown.
Not that I recall.
But since the modern budget era, which started in the 1970s, every president has had a shutdown except one. It's fairly normal in that way because it is, you have to sometimes let lawmakers touch the hot stove and burn their hand. They say, well, we'll shut down. We won't do it. And then they do it. And then you see where the pressure really lies. And in this case, there's pressure on Republicans, big pressure because they control the White House, they control both chambers of Congress. It's their job to get it done and run what's supposed to be the ordinary business of government. But on the other hand, there's pressure on Democrats. Just as Cotton points out, there are not a lot of voters out there who are going to be happy if ordinary functions of the government are faltering while we're engaged in a fight over what are still, no matter how sympathetic their cases, people who are in the United States illegally.
Well, it's interesting because in the past, when Democrats have been in charge, somehow still the Republicans have gotten in trouble for the government shutdown. It seems like it always breaks against them. And, you know, we got to see whether they'll be willing to play with it this time because they do, in many respects, as Tom Cotton is saying, they're trying to wedge this principle in that they want to be for Americans and running their government and not for people who are here illegally, although we know many of them came here as children.
Right.
But in the meantime, where do we go now with the showdown between the president and Senator Dick Durbin? They've had a lot of words back and forth. Who needs who more now in this scenario?
Well, look, Trump is counting on Durbin for a great deal. The Republicans are counting on Durbin to be the guy who corrals 9 Democratic votes. So you can find 5 or 6 Democrats who are sort of moderate Democrats or they represent red states, or you can apply 2018 election pressure to them. There are maybe 5 or 6 of them in the universe. To get to 9, you got to get into the core Democrats. And he's probably going to need Durbin himself to take the hit and go vote for the legislation. So where do you get those 9 Democrats? And especially at this moment when Democrats believe that they will be more advantaged in a shutdown, they will be able to survive the fallout better than Republicans can, it's hard to get them to the table. That's why I think we end up with a shutdown, is because for those Democratic holdouts, they're going to want and see how it plays. They're going to want to wait and see, how's this really playing out for us? Are we getting hit on this? Are Republicans getting hit on this? How is this going? And we've never had this one before. Normally, we have what we call the Washington Monument strategy. As soon as the shutdown occurs, you go shut the most public, visible things that you can.
All the parks and
shut
all
the
that
national
stuff,
parks, hang those signs up there so you can make sure the president can make sure that Congress is paying the price. In this case, it's Republicans and Republicans. They're just missing at the margins.
Right. And just so everybody knows, as we like to emphasize, Social Security checks still go out. Basic government functions are happening. A lot of people get paid back once the shutdown is over. So there is temporary pain for some people. But You know, the world does not come to an end when these shutdowns happen.
Well, don't wait until you see if you get an alert on your phone. There'll be an alert on your phone if it's.
Well, we did have Senator Schatz in his tweet, and we're in Hawaii. Be careful. All right, thank you. Good to see you.
Happy Monday.
All right, trade leaders from Mexico, the United States, and Canada set to meet next week to potentially renegotiate NAFTA as the future of America's involvement in the agreement remains unclear. The administration's approach to the renegotiation has set off shockwaves of concern from Mexico City to Ottawa that the U.S. might soon abruptly end the 24-year-old agreement. There are reports tonight the president may be softening his line on NAFTA as he meets with Republican senators who are trying to sell the current deal because of the benefits to their individual states. Well, the employee responsible for Saturday's false doomsday alert in Hawaii has reportedly been temporarily reassigned. Officials there are also changing the protocol for when an incoming missile alert can be issued. Typically idyllic Hawaii was subjected to a widespread bout of panic when the island's emergency distress system mistakenly warned people that a ballistic missile was inbound. It would only take about 30 minutes for an actual missile launched from North Korea to hit Hawaii, and residents would have about half that time to get to safety. There are now both state and federal investigations into the botched text alert. Well, the Hawaii incident underscores just how dangerous and tense relations with North Korea have become. Tonight, historic meetings are underway in Vancouver, co-hosted by Canada's top diplomat and Secretary of State Rex Tillerson. Correspondent Rich Edson is live with the Secretary of State tonight from Vancouver. Good evening, Rich.
Hi, good evening, Shannon. The Secretary of State Rex Tillerson has just arrived here in Vancouver a short while ago. He's at a dinner now with some of the participants, and then we'll have a meeting with the Canadian foreign minister and the foreign ministers from South Korea and from Japan. The goal of this meeting tomorrow is an attempt to fight North Korean smuggling, perhaps initiate a naval blockade of North Korea. Despite the international effort to isolate and economically choke off North Korea and South Korea met again this morning. They have agreed to allow North Korea to send an orchestra as part of its growing delegation to the South Korean, the Winter Olympics held in South Korea next month. They also discussed the potential of a joint North Korea-South Korea ice hockey team, a women's ice hockey team. It would be the first unified team for Korea to compete in an Olympic Games if they agreed to that. Now, back here in Vancouver, there are 20 total countries meeting. That includes the United States and Canada tomorrow, though there are two notable absences. China accounts for 90% of North Korean trade. It has been the centerpiece of the U.S. effort to try to isolate and cut off North Korea. It won't be here. Russia won't be here as well. The U.S. says it has been consulting with the Chinese and Russian governments ahead of this meeting on this summit and will keep them updated to the progress that they're making here, though Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister for Russia, responded to that notion saying it is, quote, outright lies. We said clearly that we consider these efforts and this meeting to be destructive. The U.S. says that the United States and Canada decided to only invite the countries that participated with the United States, were allied with the United States and the United Nations during the Korean War more than 60 years ago. Shannon, back to you.
Rich Edson, thank you very much, traveling with the Secretary of State. Well, it could be another big week for the Russia probe, with at least 3 top current and former Trump advisors reportedly set to appear before the House Intelligence Committee behind closed doors. Numerous reports tonight that former Chief White House strategist Steve Bannon will testify tomorrow. He could face questions about those controversial comments he made about the president's family and the Russians, characterizing Donald Trump Jr.'s Trump Tower meeting as quote-unquote treasonous. White House Communications Director Hope Hicks may appear Friday, and former campaign manager Corey Lewandowski also expected to testify this week. Well, should a single federal judge be able to wipe out an entire national policy? Some experts are worried a judge's ruling to block President Trump's plan to end DACA interferes with the notion of an impartial bench, and he's done something really surprising. That's next. Plus, a women's rights pioneer expressing caution about the Me Too movement, and she's taken plenty of heat for it. And later, when night court convenes, multiple lawsuits blame a power company for the largest wildfire in California's history, the one that led to those deadly mudslides. Our legal eagles break down the arguments and liability, and you will be our jury. Immigration authorities quietly resumed accepting DACA deferral requests on Saturday. Immigrants who previously got protection under the DACA program may now apply for renewal. Now, this is all happening because a federal judge in San Francisco temporarily blocked President Trump's plan to end DACA later this year. But many legal experts are calling that ruling problematic, saying it could damage the notion of an impartial bench. Joining me now to discuss is senior legal fellow at the Heritage Foundation, Hans von Spakovsky. Great to see you tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming in. Okay, so I want to read a little bit of what the judge said in blocking DACA and some of the rulings that he's had with respect to this case and some pretrial motions. He said, campaign rhetoric so closely tied to the challenged executive action is admissible to show racial animus. He says the plaintiff's allegations raise a plausible inference that racial animus towards Mexicans and Latinos was a motivating factor in the decision to end DACA. This is the same thing we've seen with the travel ban, too. Right. Them going back to campaign statements and saying what he said then is the reason we're going to stop him from doing this now, even if the measure on its face, you could maybe argue was valid or neutral.
Yeah, and I think that shows how wrong the judge is. I mean, look, you can read his opinion, and it reads more like an extended op-ed than an actual legal decision. And the key thing here is that's just, I got to say it's bizarre, is that he's ruling that this president cannot revoke or change a policy implemented by a prior president. And that we've never, ever had a judge say that in our entire history. It's really a bizarre is one word, nutty is another word.
Well, and what we have is one federal judge in a district court in San Francisco shutting down a nationwide policy, and there are now concerns being raised by this. Samuel Bray, who's a law professor at UCLA's law school, he says, how can a single judge decide a question for the whole country? Increasingly, legal scholars are concerned about the way national injunctions are transforming the relationship between the courts and the political branches, saying all you got to do is one judge, file with that one judge who disagrees with you, and you can shut down anything any administration tries to do. Yeah,
and so it's a race to the courthouse. I actually think this judge was ignoring prior Supreme Court precedent. There's a case from, I think, the 1970s called U.S. versus Mendoza, and it says that a federal court can't bind non-parties to a case. So this guy could issue an injunction with regard to the actual individuals who sued in the case, but he can't issue this broad injunction for all these people who aren't in the case. I mean, that's Supreme Court precedent, and the judge is ignoring it.
Well, and one of the things that conservatives are constantly worried about is activist judges and people who legislate and make these decisions from the bench. There's a lot of that going on in the Ninth Circuit, at least with respect to this president. So now we wait to see what the administration is going to do as far as filing legal challenges. But it's interesting because you noted something, that this judge has done something very unusual.
Yeah, look, something that's evidence of a political decision by a political judge is that when this case was first filed last fall, he issued an unprecedented order for broad discovery. He told the White House they had to turn over absolutely everything they had about the decision to end DACA. This was appealed by the government to the U.S. Supreme Court. They ruled 9-0 against this judge, but you know what he did? He filed his own brief with the U.S. Supreme Court. I have never heard of anything like that happening, and for a judge to file a brief arguing to a court, well, you should uphold my opinion, that's just not done, and it shows the bias of the judge.
It is very interesting. Okay, in the meantime, very quietly, the Immigration and Customs Service on their website posted this notice saying, due to a federal court order, USCIS has resumed accepting requests to renew a grant of deferred action under DACA. Now, that's not something the administration is going to want to broadcast loudly, especially because so many in their base are not for that. But now they've quietly said, well, until we get this figured out with this judge, for now, we're going to go ahead and start accepting these renewals for deferral again. That seems a little bit under the radar.
Well, yeah, I think they don't want a lot of notice about it, but they don't really have any choice until they do an emergency appeal of this judge's opinion. They're going to win. That is, the government's going to win.
Maybe not at the Ninth Circuit.
Maybe not the Ninth Circuit. But look, we've already gotten the Supreme Court ruling against this judge on one of his prior orders, and I think they're going to do it again.
All right. Well, in the meantime, those grants and the deferrals will continue, or at least the applications for them. Hans, great to see you tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Well, now an illegal immigrant who threatened to kill everyone aboard a Greyhound bus. He'd reportedly been deported before. So what happened on that wild ride, and what happens to the suspect now? Plus, prominent female pioneers cautioning that the Me Too movement may have gone too far, and now they're facing some heated backlash. And how does First Lady Melania Trump's luxurious wardrobe fit in with one of the president's biggest campaign promises? Yeah, the mainstream media has got a problem with it. We'll check it out coming up. Following Hollywood's lead, lawmakers say they plan to wear black to the president's State of the Union address later this month to draw attention to women's issues. But questions are being raised about the Me Too movement by former Secretary of State and women's rights pioneer Condoleezza Rice.
Let's not turn women into snowflakes. Let's not infantilize women. I don't want it to get to a place that men start to think, well, maybe it's just better not to have women around. I've heard a little bit of that, and it worries me.
The former Secretary of State's not the only women's advocate with concerns. Some European actors are taking heat for statements they've made as well. Trace Gallagher has been following the response and joins us from Los Angeles. Hey, Trace.
Shannon, writer-comedian Aziz Ansari is the latest celebrity accused of sexual misconduct. A woman told Babe.net that she went on a date with Ansari last year, and after much consideration and talking with several friends, she concluded that she was the victim of sexual assault. Many on social media condemned Ansari, but many did not. In fact, as some point out, the woman acknowledges that the initial sexual encounter was consensual. And as she became more uncomfortable, instead of saying no, she indicates that Aziz Ansari failed to pick up on her negative signals. The Atlantic's Caitlin Flanagan writes, quote, apparently there is a whole country full of young women who don't know how to call a cab, and who have spent a lot of time picking out pretty outfits for dates they hoped would be nights to remember. They're angry and temporarily powerful, and last night they destroyed a man who didn't deserve it. Ansari has said he took the woman's words to heart, but also says the sex was completely consensual. Then there's actress Catherine Deneuve, who along with 100 other French women signed a letter denouncing the Me Too movement, arguing the movement had caused people who did not deserve to be condemned to face the same consequences as sex offenders. Deneuve later walked her stance back a bit, saying she stands by her statement but does not condone sexual abuse or misconduct. Finally, actor Liam Neeson says the Me Too movement is healthy, but also a bit of a witch hunt. Watch.
There's some people, famous people, being suddenly accused of touching some girl's knee or something, and suddenly they're being dropped from their program or something.
He apparently referred specifically to Garrison Keillor not being as bad as, quote, other Harvey Weinstein stuff. Neeson says he's also on the fence concerning allegations raised against Dustin Hoffman. Shannon.
All right. Thank you very much, Trace Gallagher, with the update from L.A. A man accused of threatening to kill riders on a Greyhound bus is in custody tonight in Chicago, reportedly in this country illegally after having been deported at least once before. Matt Finn has the story of a terrifying ride for passengers.
Shannon, a Greyhound bus from Milwaukee to Chicago took a horrifying turn when an illegal immigrant aboard started pacing back and forth, threatening to shoot and kill everyone while reaching toward his waistband, according to passengers. Police say at least 2 passengers called 911 from the moving bus about 33-year-old Margarito Vargas Rosas. The Department of U.S. Border Control and Customs tells Fox News Vargas Rosas has been apprehended and ordered for deportation 5 times.
Yeah, it almost felt like a terrorist situation because you're on a bus, you know, and a guy saying he's got a gun. He was acting crazy.
When squad cars attempted to pull the bus over, the driver did not stop. Police dropped 2 separate spike strips to stop the bus. Officers say the driver thought police were involved in a training exercise and were there to assist him versus pull the bus over. Vargas Rosas was ordered off the bus at gunpoint. He then made threats to police and was arrested. Police did not find a gun, and fortunately no one was hurt.
We dodged a bullet. We really did, in my view.
The suspect is charged with making terroristic threats. Tonight, the suspect is locked up in an Illinois jail without bond, and he'll stand before a judge on Wednesday. The lead agency in this criminal case is a Wisconsin sheriff who has requested the suspect be extradited back to Wisconsin. Shannon?
All right, Matt Finn with the latest. Thank you very much. All right, what you're about to hear is a real news roundup from across the nation. The Washington State Department of Licensing will no longer release personal information to federal immigration authorities unless there's a court order requiring them to do so. Washington is among a handful of states that allow illegals to get driver's licenses. And because it now looks like federal immigration officials will have to go to court every time they want to get a driver's license and some information, the new policy is expected to hinder their efforts to deport illegals from Washington state. On this Martin Luther King holiday, there is much to celebrate in what Dr. King did to advance social justice and to try to heal the country's divisions. Like many, the NAACP believes there's still a lot of work to do, now pointing to climate change as the next battle for civil rights. An NAACP official says to fully achieve Dr. King's vision, we must defeat global warming. The media's latest dig at First Lady Melania Trump, some of her dresses are foreign-made, not America First. A feature by the Associated Press says since most of her clothes are made by European designers, the First Lady, quote, seems unconcerned about how her foreign fashion squares with voters in President Donald Trump's political base. But remember, many American designers have publicly refused to dress the First Lady because they don't like her husband. And Jesuit-run Georgetown University here in Washington is approving an LGBTQ-only dorm. The university says the move is in keeping with its Catholic and Jesuit values of inclusion and touts the benefits for students of a unique residential space dedicated to exploring and understanding themselves and others in relation to gender and sexuality. Well, feeding the homeless lands a bunch of activists in legal trouble. Peter Dooser investigates what appears to be a crackdown on homelessness in the Golden State. Plus, look who's running for Senate. A former Army soldier convicted of leaking our national secrets and violating the Espionage Act now wants to be a U.S. lawmaker. And a former presidential candidate who sparred with President Trump is reportedly back at it again. We'll debate the latest moves in the midterms next. Considering its reputation as a technology leader and as a state with the 6th largest economy in the world, it may come as a surprise that California has the highest poverty rate in the nation. Peter Ducey is here to explain the surprising details. Hey, Peter.
Shannon, a dozen people wound up in handcuffs this weekend for trying to help their homeless neighbors by hand delivering food and toiletries. The reason that officials in El Cajon outlawed distributing food in parks and other city-owned places is because they say they want to stop the spread of deadly hepatitis A, but some locals are looking at it as a way to drive the homeless out of town. So a group called Break the Ban decided to test the will of local law enforcement, and they've now got misdemeanor citations to show for their efforts. When the LAPD tried to do something similar by cleaning up the notorious Skid Row neighborhood, they closed bathrooms there, also because they said they were trying to stop the spread of disease. And something even more straightforward is about to happen in Anaheim. The same city where Cinderella's castle stands on the grounds of Disneyland is also home to a 2-mile-long tent city, where authorities have plastered warnings now to clear out by next Monday, or the tents and the camps are going to be cleared out for them. And once the hundreds of homeless people that live there are displaced, a new analysis of the poverty rate shows the challenges that lay ahead if they decide to stay in California. The Stanford Center on Poverty and Inequality and the Public Policy Institute of California have calculated what they're calling the California Poverty Measure, which inputs more variables than the Census Bureau does, like the high cost of housing and tax credits. And their findings are that in places like Santa Cruz, San Francisco, and Orange County, there are as many as 9% more people living in poverty than the government's numbers reflect, because welfare programs don't go very far to help people with sky-high rent or mortgages. Whereas in some other California counties like Fresno, Merced, and Kern, the new analysis finds that public assistance goes far enough that the poverty rate is actually lower than Uncle Sam thinks. And an op-ed in the LA Times this weekend by Carrie Jackson, who's a fellow of California Studies at the Pacific Research Institute, explains that some of the other reasons for California having the highest poverty rate in the country are regulations that make energy expensive and a lack of welfare reform that has created what Jackson is calling a dependency trap. Shannon?
All right, Peter Ducey with the latest out of California. Thank you. Convicted on multiple counts of leaking national security secrets, Chelsea Manning is now running for Senate out of Maryland. In a first campaign ad released yesterday, Manning narrates over clips of the Charlottesville rally that turned deadly last summer.
We need to actually take the reins of power from them. We need to challenge them at every level. We need to fix this. We don't need them anymore. We can do better.
Manning is the former Army intelligence analyst who was convicted in 2013 of leaking thousands of classified documents to WikiLeaks. Former President Obama, during his final days in office, commuted Manning's 35-year prison sentence. Let's bring in Charlie Hurt, the opinion editor and columnist at the Washington Times, also a Fox News contributor, and Josh Gerstein, a senior White House reporter for Politico. Welcome to you both.
Hey, Shannon.
Nice to be here.
All right, Josh, what do you think is behind this run?
Well, I mean, she's been looking for something to do ever since her sentence was commuted, and there's no question Chelsea Manning has become a heroine to some on the left as a result of her activities. But I'll tell you, as somebody who covered her trial, this really seemed a lot less like an act of principal whistleblowing than a complete mental breakdown. I mean, this was someone who was described as being in a fetal position on the floor of an Army center overseas. And so it's hard for me to see how that would be something tantamount to a qualification to run for the U.S. Senate.
Well, Charlie, there's an interesting theory out there that someone named Josh Manning has tweeted out. Says he's a civil rights investigator, former Army intel, and a group Vets Against Russia says this: Senator Cardin, who she'd be running against, authored and released a 200-page masterpiece on Russian influence in Western elections. Suddenly, he has a primary from Kremlin stooge Assange, WikiLeaks primary source Chelsea Manning. The Kremlin plays the extreme left to swing elections. Remember that. Is this about Russia?
I don't know if it's about Russia, but I do think that it's certainly, we spend so much time talking about the divisions in the Republican Party, and there are some real divisions within the Republican Party. But the Democratic Party has some very, very serious divisions of their own. I'm sure that Chelsea Manning will, as Josh just pointed out, will appeal to a significant portion of Maryland voters, and it'll be the choice between your sort of run-of-the-mill, irresponsible, left-wing, nutty Democrat and somebody who's even more left-wing, crazy, nuttier left-wing Democrat. And in Maryland, that could be a real toss-up.
Yeah, it's interesting because, we don't know what Ben Cardin's going to do, whether he's going to run again for this seat. We're waiting to hear about his plans. But if this is a primary, Ben Cardin is somebody who is as a senator, the ranking Democrat on Senate Foreign Relations, won, I think, last time by 30 points. So it'll be interesting to see what happens if they're both in this primary. In the meantime, we have someone we think will end up in the Utah race to fill Senator Orrin Hatch's seat, former presidential contender, former Governor Mitt Romney, tweeting a response to some of what's gone down with President Trump. He says this: the poverty of an aspiring immigrant's nation of origin is as irrelevant as their race. The sentiment attributed to POTUS is inconsistent with America's history and antithetical to American values. May our memory of Dr. King buoy our hope for unity, greatness, and charity for all. Now, Josh, sometimes these guys seem like mortal enemies. Sometimes they're dining together over frog legs and talking about a cabinet position. It's confusing.
Well, the frog legs seem like a long time ago now to me. It seems like Romney has been on a pretty typical and pretty sharp anti-Trump bent for the last few months, which is an interesting strategy. I mean, you have other people that are facing the possibility of a Republican primary who are currently in the Congress who are basically bailing out because they don't want to deal with the Trump element in the party. And here you have Romney seeming more than happy to go up against Trump. And I wonder if that's maybe an only in Utah strategy. Maybe his messages towards Trump resonate a little more in Utah than they do with the Republican electorate in other parts of the country. And we may be about to find out.
Yeah, Charlie, how much do you think this is principle? Because a lot of folks, whether you love him or hate him, really feel like Romney does generally operate from a place of deep principle. Or how much do you think this is about the Utah campaign, or is it a mix of the two?
Well, I think unsurprisingly, there's very little about principle in much of the politics that goes on today. And I think certainly in this case, I mean, why Mitt Romney would sit here and aid and abet Democrats in their sort of ridiculous attacks, suggesting that whatever Donald Trump said was somehow racist or racially motivated or anything like that. For a guy like Mitt Romney to throw in with those kind of very spurious and I think unfounded charges against the president, it's not helpful to anybody. It's not helpful to Republicans. It's certainly not helpful to the president. But and the only person perhaps it helps is Mitt Romney, and I think it's pretty disgusting.
Oh, well, all right, Charlie, we'll leave it there. And Josh, thank you both tonight for your time. We'll see you again soon.
Thanks, Sharon.
All right, the largest wildfire in California's history is now out, but in the aftermath of the blaze, the area is facing deadly mudslides, and now a legal battle is heating up. That's next in Night Court. It is time now for Night Court. It took more than a month, but officials say the Thomas wildfire, the largest in California's history, is contained. The fire broke out in early December just outside Ventura, north of Los Angeles. It scorched more than 281,000 acres and damaged hundreds of homes. The blaze also contributed to those deadly mudslides that hit the area last week. Now, multiple lawsuits allege the fire was caused by negligence by one of the state's largest power companies, Southern California Edison. Let's convene Night Court with our legal eagles. Mercedes Colwin, a criminal defense attorney and Fox News legal analyst, and Ken Zimmerman, a contributor for the National Law Journal. Great to have you both with us tonight.
Great to be on.
Good to be here.
And listen, the more I dug around, the more I saw there are numerous lawsuits now of all shapes and sizes against the electric company, saying that what they were doing in some work led to these fires. One of the plaintiff's complaints says this, in part: defendants failed to properly inspect and maintain electrical infrastructure and equipment, which they knew, given the existing Santa Ana wind and red flag warning conditions, posed a risk of harm to the plaintiffs and to their property. Kent, how do the companies now fight back?
Well, you know, I'll tell you something, Shannon. I happen to know something about this company. I've been to their headquarters many times, met with many of their top executives as part of my work. They have some of the best minds in the business at Edison International in Southern California, Edison. They have whole teams of people devoted to making their projects as safe as possible. It's a heavily regulated utility, so the regulators are after them. And so the reality is this thing's under investigation. The investigation hasn't concluded yet, and we haven't yet seen convincing evidence that it's Edison that was not careful and caused this thing. Now, we've got to wait and respect the process and see what happens, but it's still under investigation. And the plaintiff's attorneys who wrote those phrases that you quoted, they stand to make a boatload of money. The attorneys do if things go their way. So, of course, they're going to make their case as best they can. The only other thing I'd add briefly is that at the time these fires broke out, winds were clocked in excess of 70 miles per hour in the area where the fire started.
But does
and
that
I'm not
indicate
sure,
that
I'm not
maybe
sure
they
it's
should have delayed the work or done something differently with those conditions very evident?
You know, we'll see when the results of the investigation come out, but I'm not sure it's so fair to hold anybody responsible for the fact that winds kicked up and caused an acre a minute to burn in some cases. I'm not sure that's any person, any company's fault.
Let's bring in Mercedes, because this is what the company said in a statement in early December, and they're not replying publicly to these lawsuits. But here's what they said at the time. Prior to the fires, based on forecasted winds and red flag warnings, SCE mobilized a full emergency response team, pre-staged critical field personnel, and implemented measures to mitigate impacts of high winds and potential fires. Will that absolve them of liability? They said they were doing whatever they could.
Not really, though, because that's an excellent point. I mean, of course, they're going to blame other factors involved in this fire. But when you look at the case itself, if you knew the winds were that bad, you know the Santa Ana winds, and obviously it's notorious. A lot of people know that the winds are problematic. And you have drought conditions that have existed for years, so the vegetation is ripe for these types of fires. So you have the winds, you have the vegetation in such a state. All of those combination factors, it all boils down to foreseeability. You as a company know that there are factors that can result in this type of catastrophic event. Frankly, go forward, don't stop the construction. When you look at the allegations that are set forth in the complaint, they said, we believe that the construction was done unsafely. We think that the vegetation wasn't abated, which we know it's existed in at least the allegation is that it's existed in that state for years because of the years of drought. And then you didn't maintain the electrical infrastructure by taking a look at those utility poles. What conditions were they in? Did you repair them? Did you do anything? And to stop the interaction between the utility poles, the electrical current, and it could have sparked this fire in that vegetation in the state it was. So all of these factors, though, can result in a problem for the company.
I'd imagine there's going to be quite a lot of discovery in this case. But I want to ask you quickly, I'm just going to quick response from both of you. Because now, you know, out there they're saying, the environmentalists said that when you look at it, the Thomas fires are what led to the conditions that now led to the mudslides. We know of at least 20 people killed. Kent, you first, and Mercedes, how quickly do you think we'll see lawsuits on the mudslides?
I think likely very quickly. Yeah, I agree with Mercedes, and I think we'll see them quickly. But listen, I think Mercedes is a talented litigator. She makes a compelling case, and the allegations are compelling. But the key word is could have caused. Show me the evidence. We haven't seen the hard evidence that Edison caused this thing yet,
and we may
that's
get
what'll
there.
be convincing.
And Mercedes, that's what discovery's about.
Oh, sure. You've got experts that are come forward. You have witnesses, experts, and you have the compelling stories of these plaintiffs. These are folks that are going to be, if they've survived summary judgment, they're sitting in front of the jury, that jury is going to be very empathetic towards these individuals that lost their homes. And then you have the estates that are going to follow suit with those that have lost their lives.
All right, Mercedes and Kent, we thank you for weighing in as our able counselors tonight. Tweet us from at home at Shannon Bream or at Fox News Night to let us know what you think about the case and how you'd rule as a member of the jury. Thank you both.
Thank you.
You bet.
All right, Queen Elizabeth dishes on what a tin of biscuits has in common with Britain's crown jewels. That's next. There's a reason you've never seen Queen Elizabeth look down while wearing her famous crown, she says, because they're too heavy. By the way, a historian interviewing Queen Elizabeth also revealed to her that the crown jewels were hidden in a biscuit tin and buried at Windsor Castle during World War II. She replied, wondering aloud what would have happened to the jewels if the man who hid them had died during the war. Well, hundreds gathered today for a wreath-laying ceremony at Washington's Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial. Vice President Mike Pence and his wife Karen took part in the ceremony at the memorial. Sunday, Pence tweeted this. He took the words of our founders to heart to forge a more perfect union based on the notion all men are created equal and in the image of God. Most watched, most trusted, and most grateful you spent the evening with us. Good night from Washington. I'm Shannon Bream.